So welcome to today's panel discussion on navigating the challenges of decarbonization across the LNG value chain. This panel is a pre-event related to the upcoming World LNG Summit and Awards that will take place in Berlin between the 9th and 12th December. I'd like to thank the organizers of this webinar to give me the opportunity to discuss with key experts on this crucial topic for GII-GNL, the international group of LNG importers in which I'm general delegate. Early October, during our General Assembly, we released the Hiroshima Declaration, which aims to highlight the key features of LNG that enable it to contribute to a well-supplied, stable, and lower carbon energy system. This declaration means to seek the understanding and cooperation of governments, related institutions, companies, and organizations to achieve this contribution. It emphasizes how the sustainability of LNG is being improved, but can be also further improved. Today, we are fortunate to have with us a group of experts, each bringing its unique perspective on the challenges and opportunities we faced in making LNG a cleaner, more sustainable energy solution. Together, they'll help us to explore how our industry can adapt and thrive in a world increasingly focused on environmental impact. Now, rather than me talking about these experts, I'll hand over to them to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit more about their roles, and share a quick thought about today's team. Let's keep it brief and think of it as an elevator pitch, but the elevator only going up to 1 or 2 floors. Afterwards, we'll go into the heart of the discussion through some questions I'd like to have their views on. So I give the floor to our first panelist, Simon Ames.
Yes, good morning, good day, everybody. My name is Simon Ames. I'm the Managing Director at Dragon LNG and Dragon Energy. We're based in a place called Waterston, which is Pembrokeshire in Wales, and we are one of the 3 regasification terminals in the UK. I'm excited to join today, so I'll be talking a little bit about Dragon's work in the energy transition and decarbonising our terminal and helping to decarbonise the industry around us.
Thank you, Simon. Then I'll give the floor to Anne-Sophie Corbeau.
Thank you, Laurent, and good morning, everyone. My name is Anne-Sophie Corbeau. I am a global research scholar at the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University. And even though I am working for Columbia University, I am actually based in Paris. I'm leading the research centers on basically natural gas and hydrogen, which is one of the reasons I'm here.
Thank you, Anne-Sophie. Now, Andrea, can you tell us a little bit about you?
Yep, with pleasure. Happy to be here. Morning, everyone. My name is Andrea Quagliano, working for Edison. It is the oldest energy company in Europe. We are Italian, based in Milan, and we are the 2nd largest importer of natural gas in Italy. What I'm doing currently is providing the natural gas portfolio with green gases. So I'm off-taking biomethane, and I'm also charged to decarbonize the existing fossil fuel natural gas portfolio. So there are many challenges ahead. I'm very glad to be here to discuss with such distinguished panelists.
Thank you, Andrea. Georgios, from IMIQ, can you give us a little bit of background on you?
Yeah, thank you, Laurent, and great to be here. Good morning, everybody. My name is George Tybus from MIQ, which stands for Methane Intelligence. We're a certifier. We kind of created certification for gas and now rolling this out in crude as well, actually, with the purpose of making methane emissions and ultimately also CO2 emissions transparent, but not just transparent, but also transactable. And so over the last we're a relatively new company. We're a not-for-profit, which is also key. And we've certified 240 BCM over the last couple of years and are now starting in the LNG sector. Recently, we certified grain LNG in the UK. So I'm really excited about this panel because a next step is all about methane transparency in the supply chain of LNG. So looking forward to this panel.
Thank you. And finally, we have Masataka Yarita from JobMec.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon to all. Thank you for your introduction. And my name is Masataka Yarita. I'm a head of Methane Management Task Force at Japan Organization for Metals and Energy Security. So formerly known as our organization was Japan Oil, Gas and Metals Corporation. So we are the governmental agency. Traditionally, we are actively involved in the security of supply and price affordability of the natural resources to Japan. And now we have expanded our function to cover cleaner fuels, and also we are doing some work on the CCS, and also we are actively working on the methane reduction issues jointly with Japanese and Korean largest LNG buyers. And we launched the initiative called the Clean Initiative to make put more transparency on the LNG value chain. So, and today I'd like to bring some key takeaways from these activities and also our measurement activities in the Southeast Asia and so on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now let's move to the discussion, and maybe we can start with the first questions I'd like to address to you. How can existing LNG infrastructure be repurposed for renewable fuels for further drive decarbonization across the industry? Who would like to take over this one?
I think I'll come in and take this question if that's okay. I'll talk at the demand end of the LNG value chain. So Dragon is a regasification terminal, as per my introduction. It's one of only 3 in the UK. So our primary role is to ensure secure supply of gas into the UK. So reliability, energy security is absolutely critical. But we're also playing an important role in South Wales. South Wales is one of the largest areas of industry with regards to carbon emissions. And so we're looking at our own emissions and how to decarbonize that. What we're also doing is working in renewables. So Dragon Energy is a renewables park, which is next door to the LNG site. So through renewables and growing what we're doing there, both solar and wind. And yesterday was an exciting day for us. We received a planning application success with the Welsh Government. So we'll soon be building more wind turbines on our site. And that will help to drive down our Scope 2 emissions. But we're also working on Scope 1, as that's not directly involving renewables or switching across to renewables, but really reducing our Scope 1 emissions. We do burn gas with respect to our regasification process, but instead we want to look at heat integration with the next door power station. So using their heat, as well as possibly using some heat from the haven, like a lot of other LNG terminals do in Europe. And that will help to reduce our Scope 1 down to 0. But we're not stopping there. We're also playing a really important role, not just to decarbonize the LNG value chain, but working with the power station. So we've got an exciting project right now where we'll take the CO2 from the power station through carbon capture. So this is our CCS project. It's called Milford Haven CO2. We'll take the CO2 across to our LNG site. And what is unique about this is that we'll use our cold LNG as the means to liquefy the CO2. So we have that, instead of using lots of power to liquefy CO2 from the power station, we'll be able to drive down their emissions by liquefying the CO2, putting it onto ship and into sequestration sites in the North Sea. Now, we're only at feasibility, but it's exciting times. The UK government's just announced a lot of funding for a couple of big CCS projects in the UK, and we're hoping to be part of that next year as the CCS and the market around carbon grows in the UK. So that's what Dragon is doing with respect to decarbonizations. As I mentioned earlier, Dragon Energy will be growing renewables in the future as well. So the next 10, 20 years for our business and our part in the LNG value chain is particularly exciting.
Is there any other comments from a panelist regarding the maybe the other segment on the value chain. If I may, I would just maybe add a word on that, talking about the liquefaction part of the LNG value chain. It's not about introducing renewable fuels, but rather lower emissions, carbon or methane emissions. And we saw when we look at all of the projects of liquefaction, there are several initiatives to lower the emissions. And before lowering emissions, and I think we will touch on that later on during the panel, but there's a huge effort to measure and to assess and especially the methane emissions related to these plants. I saw in the news today that, or yesterday, that Cheniere has released an involvement to lower its methane emissions to, I think, something like 0.03% of methane emissions in their liquefaction plants. And globally, there is a strong move within the industry to address the issue and to work on decarbonization, especially on lowering the methane and carbon emissions. There are also, yeah, please. No.
And Laurent, if I can add to that, maybe, I mean, what we have seen, especially on the liquefaction side, is two things. I mean, the first one is either to use clean electricity, so that can come from renewables or from hydro, in order to basically do the liquefaction. So instead of using natural gas, you are using clean electricity, which implies some changes. What we have also seen is the use of CCS in some instances, also in order to reduce the CO2 emissions. But here we are talking about CO2 emissions, which is something different from the methane emissions, which I think we are going to discuss later. I would like also to say that here in Europe, I have seen a lot of terminal holders trying to think ahead about what is going to be the future use of their LNG regasification terminals, and thinking about, okay, are we going to use them in order to import synthetic methane? Are we going to adapt them in order to import maybe liquid hydrogen, maybe ammonia, basically all the new gases that we are currently talking about. But this is very difficult because, as we all know, the hydrogen economy, it's still very much in its infancy.
Yeah, if I can add the comment.
Yeah.
As long as I'm working currently in the green gas origination side, and we are mostly dealing with biomethane and explore the new type of renewable fuels for being produced locally throughout Europe or imported from other areas. The things we are now observing is that the costs associated for producing renewable fuels outside Europe are pretty expensive. So for the time being, in the short run, I would not see renewable fuels be available for being transported to the regasification terminals, because the cost will be driving the choice of many operators in whether to continue on that side or not. But within Europe, biomethane can be associated with certification, that is the proof of sustainability, that can in a way reduce the emission of the molecule that is imported from the traditional LNG side. So the biomethane locally produced can be offsetting part of the carbon emissions of the natural gas industry. So this is one of the reasons why the maritime sector and other sectors are looking for expanding the production of biomethane in Europe, for enabling also the traditional LNG sector to be equipped with this type of optionality in reducing the emissions.
And if I can maybe add to that as well, there is actually also another big part that one needs to take into account, not just so we talk about CO2 emissions at the plants, indeed the possibility of biogas being introduced as a fuel. But the elephant in the room is actually really feedstock gas going into the LNG liquefaction plants. That's where the real emissions are taking place. And I'm kind of parking here the actual consumption of the gas. This is all around what's in the supply chain. And that's really the elephant in the room. And so what we are seeing now, as this started in the US, is that a lot of the exporters are starting to sign contracts where they are purchasing low methane certified gas. So again, it's keen that that is independently verified, which is why we set up MIQ. But if one runs the calculations on this, the impact of buying low methane gas versus buying the average gas, this is kind of valid for the United States, where there is indeed the average gas is relatively high in methane emissions. And there's different reports out of them, some a bit more kind of, let's say, trying to grab attention, but the numbers are relatively high. However, the difference between the average gas and the specific gas of specific suppliers is actually humongous. And the cost of doing this is very low. So actually, the bigger kind of impact the whole sector can contribute is by switching to low methane feedstock gas. And the industry, the operators industry, can definitely perform on that. First of all, there are many who are already low methane. But what we need is the LNG industry to request that low methane gas input. And then the impact, that's really where all the methane sits. If you run the calculations on a global basis, this can be, give or take, 5 billion ton of CO2e per year, equivalent roughly to all the cars being taken off the road. So we believe that that's really where the big bang for the buck sits, and that's where I think the LNG sector can play a huge role.
Maybe if I could just come back in on the bio-LNG question that was asked. So if I talk in the context of the UK and our terminals, we have two customers. We have Shell, we have Petronas, who use our terminal to bring in their LNG carriers into the UK. Through our customers, they can look at possibly trading bio-LNG. I think one of the challenges is there enough bio-LNG to be traded into our tanks, as well as the demand side. So in the UK, if the demand for bio-LNG within the UK grows, or there's a premium for that, I think there's certainly opportunity and certainly discussions taking place with respect to opportunities around this. But I think it's a bit of a watching brief at the moment as that demand grows, and we see a premium for that in the market in the UK.
And if I can add my 2 cents on that, I mean, biomethane globally is in the order of 10 billion cubic meters. The global gas demand is 4,000. So in thinking, and Andrea mentioned the cause, that there will be biomethane exported from one country to another is probably a little bit unrealistic. And also, I mean, when I'm looking at really which countries are going to be the largest biomethane producers or have a lot of potential, I mean, you're thinking of Brazil, you're thinking maybe of China, India. I mean, they are not equipped with liquefaction. So we are not going to build on purpose liquefaction LNG terminal to export biomethane to other regions. I think that should be better used locally. So I don't think there will be trade, maybe certificates, but trade of biomethane internationally with the current LNG value chain. I am absolutely in agreement with bio-LNG locally, but not going from one place to another. That's my 2 cents.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, I agree with you. Just to maybe expand a little bit more, the comment I made earlier is bioenergy is essentially sourced primarily locally. It would be destined for local market. But LNG comes from the worldwide market. So you can use the proof of sustainability as soon as it gets to the local market, and you make the combination of the two.
Thank you all. I think you answered some of the questions we have in the Q&A. Maybe we can go through to the second question. So how can LNG emissions be offset from well to wheel to ensure carbon neutral LNG cargoes? So who want to jump on this one?
Yeah, if I may, I'd like to answer that question very briefly. From my point of view, it is important to see how much of the emissions from the energy need to be offset. We need to understand the amount need to be offset very clearly. So in order to see that, the accurate measurement is the key. So it is important to have the common mechanism or standard to accurately measure the amount of the emission from the energy. That's important. So in this regard, the discussions are underway among nearly 18 natural gas producing and consumers economies to establish a common framework for measuring, monitoring, reporting, and verification, known as the MMRE framework. So mainly the US DOE and European Commission and the Japanese government and JOGMEC itself is in that discussion. Already there are several reporting ecosystems like OGMP 2.0 and reporting methodology mandated by the regulators to monitor emissions from the operations within the particular jurisdictions. In addition, third-party certification of the methane emission, like our dear colleague from MIQ, and also the GHG emission data from LNG cargo voluntarily disclosed by the energy producer like Cheniere. So however, I would say there's no common and standardized framework to measure the emission. So that standardization should provide a very strong basis for monitoring methane emission and encourage natural gas and LNG producers to take more action to mitigate and measures to reduce their GHG emissions, including methane. So, and also it helps LNG buyers like Japan, Korea, or China, or other emerging economies need more reasonable source of energy to keep the economies going. So it is good to have the common standards to know the accurate emissions they procure or they source. So that's my comments on the energy emissions. So I'd like to highlight some importance of the standard to measure the emissions globally. Thank you.
And if I can add my 2 cents, I mean, we are looking at two different things. We are looking at CO2 on one side and methane emission on the other side. I think CO2 is probably better understood than methane emission, and George can definitely add on the methane emission. For CO2, the bulk of the emissions are from the combustion at the end user side. And this is what Simon was mentioning at the beginning, capturing the CO2. You can also do CO2, CCS, for the liquefaction, or you can also electrify with clean energy or clean electricity. Methane emission, this is mostly on the upstream. And then you have also liquefaction, the transport, the shipping, and the regasification, but this is mostly an upstream part. So calls for different answers, different solutions, and I'm sure everybody can contribute to that.
Yeah, maybe to pick up a bit on that, on the methane angle. So, I mean, our research has shown, I'm sure you're going to agree there, Anne-Sophie, it's mainly indeed at the upstream part. The liquefaction plants, at least on the methane, is a smaller part in the total supply chain. And coming back to Masataka-san's earlier comments, what you need is to be able to build that full supply chain. But what we are facing is, of course, there is a lot of different data sets out there. And some of them are high quality and some of them are not so high quality. And so, I mean, conceptually, we as MIQ, we agree that we need to move to a world with much more higher quality data, so that the buyers or the traders or the intermediates, it doesn't matter, everybody in the supply chain involved gets that data. However, we also have to be realistic about that. And the realistic part is that it's going to take us some time to go to, and I'm just going to call it full certification, full standards of proper measurements audited at every step of the supply chain. So what you need in the meantime is a mechanism to stitch together, to amalgamate the different pieces of data. And the key here is to work with a concept called data qualifier, DQI, data quality indicators, so that there is transparency not only around methane emissions, but secondly around the quality of those methane emissions, which is the MI. And indeed, MMRV was mentioned earlier. We're part of those discussions, and we're hoping to inspire that as well, how that works. But that's really the key, because it means we can start today, and even if certain parts of the supply chain will have not so good data, at least we can create that full picture. Because if we try to wait for, I must have every part of my supply chain fully audited, fully measured, it's going to be a tough one, because you need to line up more or less 5 or 6 counterparties for what, a single cargo. It's just never going to happen like that. So you need to approach it slightly differently and embrace more or less the diversity of data, but disclose that. And once you disclose that, then I think markets will do the rest, combined with regulators. And I'm sure we'll touch upon the EU methane regs later. That's another important driving force here as well.
You want to add something?
Yeah, just providing the point of view of a buyer like us that has downstream activities with customers acquiring natural gas for their own purposes. They are now under heavier obligations, as long as in 3 years' time there will be an additional obligation with the ETS2 system. So the market, the downstream market now is questioning how natural gas can be offset or deem it to be low carbon, and which are the measures to enable them to reduce their obligations with alternative fuels or alternative certifications. And in our perspective, as said earlier, there are a number of measures like homogenizing the methodology for calculating the emissions all along the value chain, maybe creating an international framework where imports can be audited, I mean, on a general standard from the well point to the burning tip. But the biggest issue is whether the value chain can be in a way be reduced in terms of the quantity of emissions. So be considered as an abated gas. It means that throughout all the activities from the extraction to the transportation and the consumptions, there can be potential opportunities to consider that investments in green energy provided to these activities can be recognized as a certification of an effort to reduce the emissions associated to those typical activities, and this certification be transferred along the value chain to the end user that can use such a certification in reducing its cost for complying with the, for example, ETS regulation. So these discussions, I understand from George, would be, for example, pretty difficult to put in place because there will be many actors to be gathered in one place, institutions, operators. But I'm confident that the market can provide the answers to that if there would be considered in the discussions with the institutions, because we have the expertise, we have the technology, we have the maturity in knowing how this market is working and can evolve. And if the table of discussion will be open also to operators, I think that solutions can be found easily than in different cases when regulation is applied top-down without any considerations of the perspective of the operators.
Thank you, Andrea. Is there any additional comment on that? respect. No.
Would you like me to come in and answer? I think a question came in on regas terminals and looking at the customer end and when we burn the gas. So perhaps I could come in and just answer that question.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, a great question, and I think the opportunity we see is working with other industry and particularly the end users. So as gas comes through our terminal, one of the areas certainly in UK across Europe is still gas feeding power stations, and so as I mentioned earlier, we've got a very big 2.2 gigawatt power station right next door. So there's a really great opportunity whereby you can bring in LNG, take that LNG into our regas terminal, supply the power station with that LNG, and then capture that carbon as we burn that LNG for power. So that abated power and that availability and a lot of power in the UK, around 30%, I believe, is still from gas turbine power stations. And being able to abate that, capture that carbon, that CO2 from the LNG that's supplying it. And as I mentioned earlier, then taking that CO2 to sequestration sites in the North Sea, you've got that sectoral decarbonisation from that through the LNG value chain, but at that customer end where a lot of the CO2 comes from those emissions, capturing it at that power station and then sending it to store. And there's opportunities around utilisation as well. So as we capture the carbon and we have to use buffer tanks before it goes into ships, there's opportunities around utilisation. So that collaboration across industry is a huge enabler to look at these opportunities and see what we can do to further decarbonise not just where we work and our plant, but other industry around us.
And just to say that this is not something which is happening only in the United Kingdom. I mean, in France, we have also some projects, for example, around Dunkerque and around Montoire, where we have LNG import terminals. And the plan is indeed to capture the CO2 emissions, which are coming from all the industrial players which are around these zones, and capture that, send that near the LNG import terminal, and use the fact that you can have cold energy recovery. So you can use the energy which is coming from the regasification terminal to liquefy the CO2, which is really great. And then you send the CCS or in a liquefied form, you send the CO2, in a liquefied form to different storage sites.
Yeah, it's really exciting. If we had to build a standalone liquefaction plant, we'd be consuming 30 megawatts of power just to liquefy that CO2. We get it for free, as you say, and so by using the cold of the LNG, really efficient.
I can take a questions about whether the IMO LCA guidelines, which require well-to-wake records to consume fuel on board vessels, will aid in getting clear data and records. Supposedly, yes. What I can say is that within Europe, we are next year be under the FuelEU regulation that will be expanding the number of data that the ship owners have to provide to the European Union to calculate their emissions and forcing them to use renewable fuels for minimizing their carbon intensity in their travels all across Europe, back and forth. I would say that data-driven approach would be essential to provide support to both economic operators and the European Commission in this case for supporting the definitional solutions and to reduce the emissions of the entire sector. So the more we get into data-driven approach, the better, I would suppose, because we'll be helpful in understanding which are the trend and how can we better target the goals for reducing the carbon intensity.
Okay, thank you. I saw that there is a question about Japan's targets on the e-methane. I wonder if Masataka-san you can say a word on that, how you see the role of e-methane in the decarbonization of LNG industry?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yes, it's obvious that for many city gas operators, they have the specific target to penetrate the e-methane in certain time frame, like a 2030 target. At least 1% of the gas they supply will be met by the e-methane. So that's the key ambition, but it's a quite a good way to use their existing infrastructure as it is, because it's a drop-in type fuel and help decarbonize their customers' emissions. So in that perspective, the Japanese utilities are quite ambitious and quite promising about the e-methane in that perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I suggest maybe we go to the next questions for the sake of timekeeping. We already touched a little bit the subject with your comments on the previous one, but maybe you had something to add on the role of data-driven approach in the decarbonization of LNG. I wonder if maybe George, you have something to say on that in addition to what you already mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's all about data to drive this. I mean, I used to work before also in the industry, and the mantra is very clear that what you measure is what you manage. And what you measure needs to be repackaged so that the key decision maker in the chain, which is ultimately the traders, the commercial people, the negotiating people, actually have that information at hand when they decide cargo A, B, or C, whether on spot, long term, but they need to have it. So the key here is, I think, is to go away from ESG style reports once a year across the whole company. That doesn't work for decision making. That's a different kind of decision making. That's, for example, is relevant for COP discussions, but it's not relevant in the actual world of transacting LNG. And in our view, that's where the change can be made, because we are going from a world where it's not only price optionality, and clearly LNG is LNG. There are some quality difference depending on the composition, but that's all not here or there almost. That's being dealt with. But then there's going to be a third or a fourth one called the emissions. But to bring that world to reality, we need that data. And so that's why it's key that that data is not only credible, which means monitored, measured, opened, protocol audited, but also available. And the availability needs to take place at every part of the supply chain so that the operator can give their data to the next one, which is boosting, gathering, processing, who can give it to the pipeline operator, who can give it to the LNG exporter, ship. Perhaps it now arrives at Simon's facility, and he can then hand it over to, I don't know, Centrica, EDF, whichever one of the utilities. And so it's key that we get to that stage. What we find really interesting as well is then when you start to map out different supply chains, one starts to differentiate gas very clearly. On some supply chains are actually relatively low methane emissions, even if they come from regions that seem to be on a high methane emissions on average. And I think that's where we're going to go the next couple of years. We're going to differentiate supply chains. And ultimately, the market will then make its decisions. And the market forces mixed with regulation. I mentioned earlier EU methane regulations, for example. That is what's going to drive the emissions much lower. And again, LNG has got a huge role to play in there. And I think LNG industry should embrace that. That is something where it can play that role. It's got under its own control and decision making. But we need to give it the data. If it doesn't have the data packaged up, it's never going to happen.
Thank you. Just a quick comment on my side. I fully agree on that. And when we released our GI, GNL, and RV framework, one of the main hurdles that we have is the availability and the difficulty for some of our members to collect and disclose the data. So I fully agree with you, George. Any comment from panelists?
Yeah, I'd like to say a few words about the data. As George mentioned, the data is very important. And the matter is how we can get that emission data. There are two ways to calculate the amount of the methane emission, for example, using the emission factors to estimate the emissions or actual measurement. So in many cases, there are large discrepancies between the amount of the methane emission reported using emission factors and the amount of the methane emission actually measured. In some cases, emissions are significantly underestimated, and I'm referring to the report published by the UNEP. Actual measured data were reported to be 2.3 times higher than the emission calculated using the emission factors. So obviously, the use of the direct measurement data is important, but we need to balance. We cannot put all sensors or all monitoring forces to the all facilities and all assets as well. So we need to balance. So taking into account, we need to use the top-down, like a satellite image data combined with the bottom-up actual measurement data to complement or to verify these two, and so that helps the many operators to reduce the cost and time to get the actual measurement data. So, and that gives more credibility to the gas or LNG supply to the customers. So that's my impression to that question.
Yeah, and maybe if I may, I totally understand and agree with you there, Masataka-san, on the sometimes, or at least I would argue, the historical complexity of getting the critical data. And recently we did a pilot trade together with EQT, large producer in the US, and Uniper, German utility, to bring basically certified gas across the Atlantic. And to do that, all the parts of the supply chain are included in that. Now, what's key here as well is that not every part, not every segment will have the same data quality. And that's just a reality that we need to live with for a while. And I agree with you, in some cases it might be top down via the satellites because that's the only one available. In some cases it might even be calculations, and in some cases it's actually totally fully monitored, top down, bottom up, audited and everything. But I think it demonstrates that this is now possible. And so I think we also, as an LNG industry, there is I think 2025 is really like, okay, let's go and implement more of these supply chains because it can be done now. Clearly we can't because not the full needed high quality data isn't available everywhere, but let's not wait for 2030 or 2040, 50 to get that perfect data, because then nothing happens in the meantime. So yeah, hopefully in 2025 we get that going, those supply chain emissions in the LNG world.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comment, just to give to the audience a view on how we will deal with the remaining questions. We keep sometimes at the end of the discussion. Maybe now I'd like to go through a question that was already raised in the Q&A chat. It's about the EU methane regulation. So we have this new regulation that came recently, and I think the audience will be interested to see how the panelists see the impact on the LNG value chain.
Maybe I can start on that. I mean, this is a regulation which has taken probably 4 years to come. I remember seeing a first draft in 2020, and it was finally totally passed on the 4th of August 2024. And it's not only impacting it's not only about gas, by the way, it's about all fossil fuels, it's about oil, it's about coal, it's about gas, but here we are talking, of course, about natural gas and LNG. And it's impacting not only the domestic producers, but also eventually the imports. And again, I mean, this is really going into the direction of, better data, better transparency, but inevitably, what the European Commission wanted to do is also to give an incentive to all the exporters towards Europe to basically have a better understanding of their methane emissions, of the total carbon footprint of natural gas and other fossil fuels, but also to find a way to reduce these emissions. And as much as I find the regulation extremely good and very timely and very important, I find that there are still a few areas where it lacks a little bit of clarity. I mean, for example, there is a distinction between new contracts and existing contracts. And for the existing contracts, what the Commission is asking is for all reasonable efforts. Okay, what is reasonable efforts? I have worked in many international companies and institutions. I can tell you that, just from a local understanding, what the different LNG exporters are going to understand by reasonable efforts is going to be totally different. So we need to have a better wording for that. Otherwise, does that mean as an importer, I am sending an email to my supplier and that's it, I have done my reasonable efforts, or does that imply a little bit more? Also, I have had a lot of discussions about this regulation over the past 2 months, and what also people do not understand is, okay, this is about new contracts, but okay, I understand. If a contract has been signed after the 4th of August, then this is a new contract. But if my contract has, for example, some reopening clauses, and then some parts of the contracts are changed, does that mean that the contract is new or not? Because the contract might have been signed 10 years ago, but of course the contract is evolving to adapt to new conditions of the market. And I think we need absolutely more clarity on some very crucial terms in this regulation, including some very basic things. I mean, are we talking about LNG cargoes, or are we talking about, for example, an annual average when we have long-term contracts? What is an importer? That also seems to be clear, but not so clear, in fact, when you are looking at the text. So we need more clarity.
Yeah, I completely agree. Oh, sorry, please go ahead. Oh, thank you. Just providing a comment as from a buyer perspective, as when long-term contracts are made, there are lengthy discussions that are becoming essential for defining all the set of rules that are governing the economical equilibrium of the contract. But when there are some changing laws, such the methane regulation, there are a lot of, things to be settled before put them in place. And my wonder is, typically European buyers had historically bargaining power with producers, international producers, that were enabling them to agree on some set of conditions. But now I think the European buyers are put in the worst conditions in negotiating LNG supplies, because international sellers can put in comparison Europe with other areas of the world and see if the European customers are requiring some rigidity into the contract that would, in a way or another, require also additional cost. Maybe Europe will be becoming less competitive in this sense, and will be losing ground in negotiating additional supplies that are necessary for fueling our energy mix within Europe. So also, when delivering, a regulation, I think that is essential to let the economic operators sitting to the table, as said earlier, because otherwise we could compromise the ability of these economic operators to make their job. And as long as LNG is essential for providing us the energy required for primarily the industry, we need to have the ability to have clearer set of rules in order to do our job in providing the supplies required by end-user customers.
If I may add something else, I mean, fundamentally, the beauty of LNG is its flexibility. And, you know, when you have a problem, then LNG can come to the rescue. Now, if we have a differentiation between, you know, the bad cargoes and the good cargoes in terms of methane emissions, then there will be a lot of second thoughts about, okay, well, I need LNG, but can I actually import that LNG cargo or not? And the fear is a little bit that, you know, this regulation, especially if only the European Union is adopting that and not the rest of the world, is going to create more complexity around LNG trading, because people will have second thoughts about, can I send this cargo to the European Union or not? And or can I import this LNG cargo from XYZ or not, because this is a good cargo or a bad cargo? And this is something which is very important for security of gas supply, which, as we all know, is more and more important in Europe. I mean, you know, we may have a decline in terms of gas consumption, but we are still importing very significant amount of natural gas, in particular LNG.
Yeah, and to foster resilience of the European system, we need to clear really better the rules to comply with. Otherwise, security of supply will be exposed to the variability of the market. So the more we let the supplies be resilient, the better. In this case, the risk, as you said, Anne, is that supplies will be exposed to other exogenous factors that would not let the LNG be solutions for heavy natural gas in Europe.
So I can maybe comment a bit on that. So I think, I mean, there's a lot going on around the EU methane regs, and as you say, it's been 4 years in the making. And I think in its ultimate version, there was several elements that were inserted by different parties in the decision-making process. And as a consequence, it's clearly a regulation, and I think the EU is including one of the first ones to admit that. It's not your best designed regulation, let's now say, and I'm being potentially slightly gentle here. But it is what it is. It has been voted in. And we had a whole discussion earlier in this panel around supply chain emissions, and that's what we're going to require. Ultimately, that's what the European Commission is asking for, forms of, and actually it's only the upstream they're asking for. So it's an important caveat we have to put in here that a lot of people forget. What the Europeans are asking for is purely the production side of things. And that is actually not that difficult to achieve. That is, they are asking for MRV at production level. MRV at production level is absolutely not a problem. And we are seeing this firsthand. There is a lot of kind of noise coming out of the United States in particular. This is going to be impossible. Our system is too complex to deal with this. But I don't think it's just the United States. You have the same complexity of systems in Algeria, Nigeria, or any kind of country where there is multiple producers coming into an LNG terminal. But MRV quality data at the production level is already available. For example, we are certifying in the United States 240 BCM of upstream gas. That is 4 times what the EU imports from the US, because that's around 60 or 70 BCM. The same can be applied to in other countries. And so there was a really good 2 workshops that the EU organized about, I think it was last week or the week before, together with Eurogas and CATF. And I think the message is there, yes, this might be complicated, but secondly, and that's a bit my message here, and I've worked in this industry. This industry is full of very clever people who are able in 2022 rejig contracts when the Russian invasion happened. And that was very complicated, clearly, and manage the supply hanging around that. So if this industry is kind of not able to, I would, well, let me turn it around. I can perfectly see this industry being able to manage the complexity of what the Europeans are asking for. It is absolutely possible. There's very good commercial people, structuring people, legal people. All of that exists in this industry. And I think where we are seeing the Europeans are now also coming from is we are with this legislation, reopening up this legislation. Okay, that's a complicated one. Let's go for a solution. And I think what they're saying is this is up to the industry to come forward with mechanisms that work. And one of them is indeed already MRV exists at the upstream level and can be executed today. So I know, and we see this from many others, there's a lot of questions around it, and we know all the bits that are missing in the legislation. There's going to be a lot of clarification needed. For example, they haven't even defined the methane intensity. The hurdle rate is not defined. The fines have not been defined. Is there going to be different fines per country or not? And so on and on. Sophie, you mentioned a couple of the other ones as well. All of that, indeed, question mark, question mark, question mark. But honestly, any originator, trader, or structure worth their, let's be honest, highly paid checks should be able to deal with something like this. And so I think that's my challenge back to the industry. See this as a way forward, as an opportunity to look into the supply chain emissions and the upstream emissions rather than this is complicated.
To all of you for your comments on these very striking questions on the EU methane regulation. I see that we are, let's say, 4 minutes ahead of the end of our panel. So maybe take a few questions and a quick wrap up to close the session. I saw that we have a question on the use of carbon offset credits for having LNG neutral cargoes and to combine these credits with LNG or bio-LNG. Andrea, would you comment on that, please?
Yes, of course. Taking the questions about the cargo offsetting and bio-LNG, whether the combination of the two would be an opportunity for end user customers for decarbonizing their own uses. From our perspective, cargo offsetting is not a solution so far because it's not that clear. And with the issuance of the greenwash regulation, there are a lot of restrictions in calling whether the LNG can be deemed as cargo offset or not. So there are a current debate within our company and also the group in considering whether the certification of offsetting the energy cargo is something useful or not. Bio-LNG is an opportunity, but is truly local because we are now one of the leading company of taking biomethane. In Italy, we can source the proof of sustainability, but for the time being, there is some restrictions in using this certification for the ETS compliance. So the current regulation is on the way. In Italy, there are, for example, some discussions in how using this proof of sustainability for the ETS purposes. So I would say that in a couple of years' time, the framework will be clear, and maybe the LNG industry will be benefiting. But for the time being, the solutions that the market used, like the carbon offsetting, I don't think they will be recognized within the European countries as something to be proving that they are really abated. An exception would be if the European Union would be open discussions with Japan, United States, and other producers to set, as Masataka was saying earlier, the methodological framework for calculating all the data from the well to the burning tape and recognize if there are some investments in reducing the carbon intensity of the molecule that is produced and then transferred using the carbon intensity saving as a certification to be then proposed and provided to the end user customer in reducing its obligations in the ETS. But it's something that should be worked on. So not a very easy ended, but I'm confident that some solutions will be coming out in the coming years.
Very much. I think we are reaching the end of our panel. We can discuss all these key questions for, again, more 2 hours or 3 hours, but we will have the opportunity to do so in Berlin. So I invite the audience to join the World LNG Summit and Awards conference in Berlin in December. I would like to thank the panelists. Simon has just left. He has to jump straight on at 12 on other meetings. Thank you very much, panelists. Thank you very much to the audience for the relevant questions. And thank you to the organizers for holding this wonderful panel. It was a pleasure listening to you. And I look forward to meeting you in Berlin.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. See you in Berlin.
Thank
See you
you.
in Berlin.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye.